Yes, welcome to the second plenary session today, the European Green Deal, new impulses for a resource-efficient Europe in a circular economy. We have 4 guests in this virtual room. Janusz Potocznik, which I will introduce a little bit later. Then we have Dilara Burkhardt from the Parliament, and she is member of the group of Progressive Alliance of Socialism Democrats and living in a part of Germany I know from former times where I was teaching at the University of Lüneburg. Then we have Michael Bloss, member of the of the Greens. He is someone who is very young in the European Parliament, and I found it very interesting that he was working in Africa with trying to help people there developing. And last but not least of the parliamentarians, we have Sirpa Pietikainen, hopefully I say it right, which quoted that Europe should build an ecological sustainable model in terms of way of life, transport, production and consumption, as well as the economic and legislative tools which will allow to shift towards more. As a scientist, I can agree with that. And now we have 3 statements from these 3 persons, and then Janusz Potocznik will give his presentation. So, Dilara Burkhardt, it's yours.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to the discussion with you, because I think it's very urgent to discuss how the European Green Deal now gives the right impulses for a sustainable recovery. And it is the fact that we use this earth as if its natural resources are infinitely available. But that is, of course, not the case. The resources are limited and the earth is reaching its limits. To a large extent, Europe's current linear economic model is based on this assumption that resources and energy are abundant, available, and cheap to dispose of. We produce a huge amount of quantity of waste every year, and we throw this waste away for good. And we need to change this narrative in our industries from cradle to grave to cradle to cradle. The constant downward pressure on social and environmental standards is leading to more and more social inequalities and environmental devastation. The circular economy must play a crucial role in managing the transition towards social, economic, and environmental sustainability. The Green Deal has, however, a very different angle of solutions and delivers a certain answer with the Circular Economy Action Plan, which was published earlier this year, just before the pandemic reached Europe. So the worldwide pandemic has just shown us, and I'm convinced of that in a very dramatic way, how important it is that we need a systematic shift. And we are not talking about cherry picking and choosing certain sectors to deliver on that. We need to include the whole system because the signals are alarming. As we know, global consumption of materials such as biomass, fossil fuels, metals, minerals is expected to double in the next 40 years, while annual waste generation is projected to increase by 70% by 2050. And we know that half of total greenhouse gas emissions and more than 90% of biodiversity loss are due to the resource extraction and processing. In a circular economy, it might take years until banned material will disappear from the recycling stream. For instance, we have found that with the ban of the use for bisphenol A in paper receipts, it will remain in the recycled paper for up to 30 years. So we need to act, and we need to act fast. What we want to do with the circular economy is to recycle waste to obtain raw materials and also make sure that the products are designed to last and can be reused and recycled in order to have a higher value in their entire life cycle. It is clear that if we raise our recycling targets and we create the conditionalities for a high quality recycling system, we will obtain raw materials that instead of ending up in a landfill will enter and cycle in the market. So this would be a change of paradigm, because waste would have a value, and waste is not a burden anymore, but becomes an economic asset. and if this is a economic asset, it means that we will pay more attention to it, both when we recycle it at home, but also when companies begin their manufacturing process. So Europe must move to a circular model of production and consumption that respects our planet's limits. And we know that many companies have created such a business model at the expense of the environment and the people and the people's wallets. And the EU announced with the Circular Economy Action Plan that they want to end these practices. So we must succeed in leaving a positive footprint, and the speed and the scope of resource extraction has been unsustainable so far. So the circular economy is a sustainable alternative, and I think it's very much important to keep that in mind when we are talking about a sustainable recovery. And as we know, the comprehensive kickoff was promising, that was led by the Commission. We have to evaluate the Commission on the basis what will now come up and what concrete legislative proposals now will come up. So I will be happy to discuss that today.
Thank you very much for your first introduction, and we continue with Michael Bloss and his point of view. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to discuss the study soon with you. First of all, I want to say, if I have it correct, happy birthday, Dilara. I think it's your birthday, at least that's what Twitter tells me. So happy birthday, and it's great that you're on your birthday here to discuss with us this great topics. Like looking at this study, I'm reminded a lot on what is on the posters of the Fridays for Future movement, but I think it's a debate that a lot of people that have been concerned with the environment have had, which is what we always call for is system change, not climate change. And I, at least for myself, I had a lot of these discussions, and sometimes when you're a student and you discuss, and but sometimes you do not get to a point where you say, okay, let's do now this, or this the right direction. So to discuss later on a system change compass is, I think, exactly what we need in order to make this idea that we need to really like have big systemic changes, but to make it practical, to have some orientation points, I think is absolutely important. Let me just say this, one figure that is always really astonishing for me. In 2015 in Europe, every person consumed 14 tons of products. The environmental footprint is 14 tons per person. That's really a lot. We have to at least halve this, and this is a huge like step that we have to take, and we have to do this in many different ways. Dilara was discussing some of this already. When we see the Circular Economy Action Plan that the European Commission put out, see there's a lot of important things inside. I think what is really important for citizens is the right to, or the right of repair for products, is the ban of the planned built-in obsolescence of products, that that the products get destroyed very quickly. But of course, it's also a new debate about what are actually the indicators in which we measure societal progress. Like we cannot use GDP anymore, but we have to replace it with different kinds of indicators that are not as devastating as the kind of focus on only growth is. So there's a lot of debates we need to have, and I'm looking forward to discuss the findings of the report. I think it's exactly what we need, and I also see already a lot of possibilities to use this kind of new compass. For instance, when we think about how to spend the money that currently is programmed for the economic recovery. I also see possibilities of using it, for instance, when we think about how do we want to reform the European semester. So a lot of things where we really need to start acting, and that's maybe also what I took from this debates, system change, not climate change. The important thing is that we start acting now and very quick and massively, because we do not have time anymore. So happy for this report, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for your statement. And now we continue, and we continue with Janusz. Janusz Potocznik is co-chair of the International Resource Panel. He's a partner of System IQ. He is an economist. He was 10 years in the Commission, and that is a time where I remember a lot of resource and circularity and all these other things happened. I personally say that not only circularity is important, also resource efficiency and all the other instruments and measures. And I am very curious. Okay, I know his transparencies already about his report. He will show to us after that, Janusz. We will discuss this report you show to us. So please, Janusz, take over and show the transparencies.
Thank you, Harry. If it's possible to share the screen so that I can run the transparencies, because I currently see only my face. But
wait. So, okay, so that's the way to do. And
that's fine. And I can now go. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, everybody. I'm really glad that I have the ability in a few minutes to share you the essentials, because this would need a bit broader explanation that you would really understand it, what is in the System Change Compass. It was prepared by the Club of Rome and by Systemic. I'm basically double-hatted with a few of my colleagues. And it's starting from a very simple position, which was very clearly announced also by the President of the Commission, van der Leyen, in her latest State of the Union address, where she was saying it's about making systemic modernization across the economy, society, and industry, because our current levels of consumption of raw materials, energy, water, food, and land use are not sustainable. We need to change how we treat nature, how we produce and consume, live and work, eat and heat, travel and transport. So it should be a real investment plan for Europe. What is essential when we talk about the European Green Deal? I think European Green Deal was a kind of revolutionary from the point of view that on the level of the European Commission, it was for the first time so clearly said that future economic development, it's not in contradiction with preserving and protecting environment and health. On the contrary, it's actually saying that this is a precondition if you want really to grow in the future and if you want to maintain your and improve your well-being. When we were looking all together to the European Green Deal, we were pretty clear that it is very ambitious, that it sets zero net emission greenhouse gases by 2050. It's very clearly talking about decoupling of growth and resource use. It is acknowledging the need for fair and just transition, and it also aims at strongly interlinking and mutually reinforcing policy recommendations. But when one would look to the implementation, I think it's pretty uncertain. Why? Because it does not sufficiently address the drivers and pressures that cause environmental damage. It does not offer a kind of systemic perspective to guide decision-making. And of course, implementation is also put at extra risk due to the COVID-19 recovery. So what we have proposed on the System Change Compass, it's a kind of mapping and envisaging of the system, which would be in service of the planet and people, which would derive system-level orientations towards the desired state, and which would also chart pathway towards prosperity and well-being within planetary boundaries. What was the point of departure? Both the International Resource Panel and the Club of Rome are pretty clear about the fact that the core limiting factor of the human well-being and our economic development in the future are and will be even more the unsustainable use of natural resources and also environmental sinks. So that's why the report is based on natural resource optics. The way we treat natural resources to a large extent determines our economic results on one hand, as well as environmental and health on the other. So natural resources are kind of a bridge between economy and competitiveness on one hand and climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and health implications on the other. So this is a very quick, systematic picture of what you would actually find in the overall report. So first, we have designed 10 compass principles of redefinitions which would be needed to go deep in the system change. So this defines a kind of overarching system. Inside that, we are proposing for each of these 10 free system-level orientations. It's not detailed and prescriptive, but it's rather giving you a clear direction where the policy would need to go. Then we have shifted this higher level, more macroeconomic view to economic ecosystems. I will explain that a bit more in detail later. And also for each economic ecosystem, we have identified 3 to 5 very concrete ecosystem level orientations, so policy orientations on specific ecosystem level. And finally, we have identified on the basis of that economic ecosystems and on the basis of the compass orientations, something which is consistent with that. And these are very concrete development opportunities for the future. I know it's difficult to understand, but I will try to explain now a bit more in detail. So when we talk about the system change compass, we are basically calling for 10 major redefinitions. Redefining prosperity, so embracing social fairness for real prosperity. Redefining natural resource use. Prosperity should be decoupled from natural resource use. Redefining progress. Meeting societal needs as a purpose of a model based on economic ecosystems. Performance measurement updated from the global national level to the company's level. Redefining competitiveness, digitalization and smart prosperity at the heart of European competitiveness. Redefining incentives, show the real value of social and natural capital. Redefining consumption from owing to using. Redefining finance, the facilitator of the transition. Redefining governance, a systematic approach to governments which should be influenced by and led by science. Redefining leadership, intergenerational agreement through new forms of leadership. As mentioned before, for each of those 10, we have provided 3 policy level orientations. I will just give you example for the first one, for redefining prosperity. So what we are calling there is that we should balance policy attention from income and wealth creation, which is currently the focus, to income and wealth distribution also, and ensure that economic transition contributes to equality and social fairness by guaranteeing universal basic services and minimum levels of income. It is quite clear also from the Commission's data that on the basis of after the 2008 crisis, where European countries were solidly growing, the differences, the equality and social differences in the country, so access to basic services and even minimum level of income, so the levels of income differences have actually inside the member states increased. So we need to rebalance the focus. Second, we should create conditions for social acceptance of the necessary transition through enhancing the reskilling educational programs, introducing funding mechanisms to support this transition, and supporting lower and middle income groups to help them absorb the full cost introduced through all economic ecosystems. So we can't just ask that basically we should value more the nature, because this has the consequences, and we should address it in the whole context of the social and environmental story. And finally, replace part of the income-based taxes with resource-based taxes to address resource as well as social policy targets. This is just one example. There are 9 in the other areas which are following. How we have defined the economic ecosystems and why they are called economic ecosystems. In the first place, because they are so interconnected like environmental ecosystems. And in the second place, because a lot of the economic solutions can actually be learned from how the nature was treating that in the past. And we can learn also when we deliver the economic solutions today in our economy. So we have defined very simple 4 resource-intensive human needs: nutrition, housing, mobility, and then consumer goods, so the rest of the goods. And so they are connected with the majority of the natural resource use. And then we have identified also 4 additional ecosystems which are essential that you deliver those goods in a kind of responsible way, from nature-based solutions to responsible use and efficient use of energy, to use of materials, which should be done in circular way, to finally to digitalization, to innovation. So the things where also human intelligence comes into the play very much. So this is very much a very simple system, which is designed in a way that it's simplifying really the way how we should look to the human needs, which are at the end driving our economies. For each of those, this is the example of the mobility, we have identified specific policy level orientations. So, for example, here, reduce the need for motorized trips through, and then we have listed them, and so on and so on. So I will simply not go into detail. I'm just trying to convey to you the message that we went from the broadest level to the very concrete level, which actually ended with the proposal of 50 plus nascent industrial champions that should be supported to build ecosystems based on these compass orientations. Few of them in healthy food, built environment, intermodal mobility, and so on. And if you would compare them, they are a bit more than 50. And by the way, European Commission is in their research and innovation European partnerships proposing for the future 49 development orientation proposals. Many of them are mirroring. The only real difference is actually that we have a bit lost, that we are a bit more detailed, not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side, which is many times missing in the proposal. So this is the whole system. I will not repeat it again. So you have all 10 compass orientations, then inside that you have 8 ecosystems, then you have concrete development opportunities which are consistent with those, and all that is then connected with policy level orientations on the compass level, on the concrete ecosystem level, and detailed explanation of the policy orientations when it comes to development opportunities. So this is the summary of everything. The European Green Deal, it's according to us an inspiring vision for Europe's future. The vision is clear and largely agreed, but the pathways to achieve the vision are not clear. The coronavirus recovery and achieving the European Green Deal visions are 2 sides of the same coin. To achieve the European Green Deal objectives and recover from pandemic, we must address the drivers of natural resource use and that cause the worrying environmental and health consequences. 10 principles are at the core of the compass. They address how we think about prosperity and progress, the matrix we use to measure success, the way we govern and lead the transition to a sustainable future, and the enabling role of finance. Economic activity should be reconsidered as economic ecosystems, ecosystems that are addressed through resource lenses and do not just produce wealth and prosperity, but rather deliver societal needs and human well-being. And finally, within each economic ecosystem, the compass directs us to a total of 50 plus subsystems, which represent a kind of scalable, sustainable industries that can grow into the economic backbone of Europe in the 21st century. So I do firmly believe that there has never been a better moment for Europe to move from the history of a resource-driven imperialism to an era of responsible use of natural resources, mitigating its resource fragility and strengthening preparedness and resilience. This would clearly also position the European Green Deal, give it a real historic and also a strategic weight. As it was nicely said by Johann Wolfgang Goethe, knowing it's not enough, we must apply. Willing it's not enough, we must do. We are currently in the phase of knowing and also being willing, but we are far yet from really applying it and doing it. Thank you for your attention.
I will put your summary now on the screen so that we can react on that. Thank you for these ideas, and we can discuss now these results. What is the meaning? What is the meaning for the different parties? What the meaning for the European Parliament? And we start with in a alphabetical order with Dilara Burkhardt. Please, Dilara, could you give your thoughts about this summary?
Yes, I'm sorry if I'm not too detailed. I was kicked out by my Wi-Fi, so I wasn't able to follow, but I got the last summary. And I think that Mr. Potočnik is very much right when he says that the European Green Deal, especially in this moment, is an inspiring vision. But he is right so in demanding that we need to see progress when it comes about implementation. And this was happening in the first reactions when the COVID crisis has started, that there were some political voices, some actors that were doubting that we still can we can still deliver on the Green Deal as in the question of resources. But we of course know that we need to look at every penny we are spending now as it's in a historic crisis, and we need to act. And every penny we spend now has to be spent in a sustainable way. So I think the thesis is very much right. And also, I think it is clear that we also remember that, especially when it comes about the implementation, there's always the question of the social component, which is very, very much crucial. It's also something that we see, which is brought up by member states who, for example, were mobilizing against the ambitious 2030 target. And I think especially in the question of how we can organize a circular economy, there's a lot of room for having the discussion on how it is not only an elitist plan from which only one particular group benefits, and that this responsibility extends also, and this is something that maybe is also not always on our minds, is that it's a responsibility which extends also beyond the borders of Europe, because we know that a circular economy can only function as a sustainable model if we implement SDGs, for example, and responsibility for the weakest. So I think it's very much urgent that we still see the Green Deal as a ambitious vision, but we also need to talk about the implementation. I'm sorry if I am not too detailed about it, but unfortunately, as I said, I was kicked out by the Wi-Fi.
Yes, thank you for your comments, and I would like to give Michael Bloss the room, giving his ideas, his thoughts to the key messages of the Compass.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's really an impressive report that you have been doing, and certainly it is very difficult to present in 10 minutes the systemic change that we need, because it's such a broad issue. So I would be really interested also to go into the details of what it actually means on the policy level, on the implementation. So maybe there will be some more room for this. I think it's interesting when you started with redefining prosperity, redefining progress. That's a lot of cultural issues as well, because prosperity is not only there in kind of the way it is written down, but it's also what people think prosperity is. And currently we have an interesting dynamic, I would say, that on the one hand, people, especially young generations, they have already a very different definition for what prosperity is. I see very little people in younger generations, they say, okay, like the aim of my life is to have a big car and a huge house, but there are other values that are at stake. So it's interesting that on the one hand, we have to now, as in the policy field, readapt to what is already there as new definitions of for instance, progress in kind of the society already. So this has to be done. It is a very interesting framework actually doing so. And I think it's really important how you quoted Goethe, knowing is not enough, we must apply. There is possibilities of applying, and they are there. And this is a little bit the political difficulty we see, for instance, when we look into the way the recovery money is spent from the European Union. We see actually almost no conditionality from the European side. So that means that money is spent without using the knowledge that we have. And this could be, for instance, interesting frameworks. How do we spend the money? Can we channel the money into the 50 champions that you have identified? What kind of recovery effect would that have? I think that's very important things that we need to discuss, because as you also said, there has never been a better moment to use this framework. We are spending so much money right now as we will probably not spend in the next 10 years, and to spend that in a smart way to the benefit of the ecology of the planet, of the people, and to get us out of the crisis. I think it's the most important thing to think about right now. And currently, unfortunately, we see that we're not doing a very good job here. Therefore, I would be really important to now bring this very quickly into the political implementation.
Thank you for your comments. And now we switch to Mr. I don't get it. Mr. Pietikainen from the European Parliament, she is of the group of European People's Party, and hopefully she solved the problems with entering the virtual conference, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you. And I hope you can see me and hear me, because yes, indeed, I had some problems connecting on the system. Firstly, I would like to wholeheartedly thank Janez Potočnik, as always, from his very thoughtful words and work for the sustainability. Second, a couple of claims from political point of view. The first is that if the question is wrong, you can't get the right answer, or you can get it, but that is occasional lottery. And that's why we would need to build up our understanding. And I think that the foremost important thing for European Parliament and European system is to get in legislative framework that the sustainability policy should be A, science-based, and B, backcasting. So it would need to be on the challenge, on the level up to the level of the challenge. And just to mention the resource efficiency, that is the tenfold of resource efficiency, and staying within the planetary boundaries that we are not even near at the moment. Because if you do not get it right, you are going to make sunk investment, you are going to lose the time. It is like you would be trying to exercise for a marathon by just walking slightly a bit more and then wonder why you do not get the results. And this is a true paradigm change, and you can't create the concept of sailing around the world if you think that the world is flat. And unconsciously, our economic systems and policy systems think that the world and the resources are endless. So we are thinking like we would be living in open system, where we would have all the universe and multiverses and whatever planetary systems we can invent and find beyond that on our consumption. And not the astronaut view that we are in a pretty small planet, a pretty lot of people using exponentially the resources and degrading the ecosystem services. So we are like a COVID patient whose infection is worsening, and the functional, the vital organ systems are close of failing down. And then the question is, what do you do then with the patient or the system if you see that you have that kind of an accelerating system? Of course, it's the life supporting systems, and then you start treating with the root causes. And the root causes is more people, more financial resources, more goods, and shorter lifespan of the goods. And that would then actually mean that the science-based metering should go in all of our budgets, on our company reporting, and you should have not only climate budgets, but resource and biodiversity budgets, how much you can actually consume, let's say, within the next 10 or 20 years. That should be then reflected on our legislation. And actually what we are trying to do with the circular economy report is to try to make the first or second modest attempts to put that on the metering system, put that then on product legislation, on toxicity legislation, and in various parts of the society. So it is through the societal system. But the question on my mind is that this is a factual thing. This is not a matter of opinion. Whether the planetary boundaries are pretty exceeded or pretty close to be exceeded. And you need to get that enlightenment in politics. And this is the big challenge, how you can do it. Okay, then some of the proposals. First is, how do we create a better and bigger networks of networks? Because in many parts the businesses do get the point right better than do the politics. So you should ally with the businesses and try to help and demand the businesses to lobby the politicians and the trade unions, besides the NGOs and besides the science advice. You would need to engage with broader civil society, and you would need to engage somehow in civil society groups and business groups on member state level, where this seems to be even more difficult than in European level, and that concerns all the member states, be they more or less advanced in this circular economy and resource efficiency and biodiversity thinking. Then what you would need to do is, and this is where I lie my, quite paradoxically, my hope is the sustainable finance. If you can get the right incentives in financial regulations, like the triple materiality, so that in the risk perception of the companies would need to take into account not only economic and technology materiality of risks, and not only the direct, let's say, climate materiality, if your building is flooded or whether your forests are burned, as an example. The broader fact that is actually calculated by UNDDR, and that is the cost and the risk of sheer climate change. And it depends how far and in what parameters you calculate, but it is envisaged that after 10 years, if we do not make drastic changes, the climate change is going to cost at least tenfold what is the COVID crisis cost for our economy. And that is the triple materiality. If you invest or if you are engaged in activity that worsens biodiversity degradation and climate change and resource overconsumption, you are vitally threatening the really essence of the economy, and that's why you should be risk categorized in lending, in investment, in whatever credit ratings in the future. And then again, if you are part of the solution of the problem, you could get the better ratings, better loans, and better finance possibilities. And so I think that we should put much more effort and to get much more knowledge and networks together working how actually the environmental risks can be embedded throughout the financial regulations, risk perception, and incentivizing systems. Happy to continue this discussion, but I think that I've consumed my time, and so I leave the floor for others.
Thank you for commenting. Janis, do you want to react on these three? Janis?
Yes, I would certainly like to say some things.
Short, please. Yes, we don't. Okay.
It's basically, I'm really glad to see that openness and also vision coming from the members of the European Parliament, dear colleagues. And by the way, I would be more than happy to have a longer presentation and also detailed debate also in whatever fora in the European Parliament, because I think it would be helpful for all of us. The only thing which I would like to add to what was said is the reason why I'm so much actually insisting on addressing the drivers and pressures. What we have created, it's a quantity-driven economic system. So more means more, higher profits. And of course, that has as a consequence higher use of natural resources. And the side effects of that use of natural resources are well known to all of us. These are seen in climate change, they are seen in biodiversity loss, in pollution, they are seen in health crisis, and so on. So what is the real problem? The real problem is that on one hand, we are setting producers and consumers with market signals clearly in the direction to destroy natural capital. So telling them you should in the first place protect private interests. And with the right hand, then we are trying to protect public.
Piilota ikinä pyöreäksi ja teräväksi.
Second, with the right hand, then we are trying to protect our public interests. So we develop then regulation, we use the public funding to remedy the side effects, the negative effects which we are creating right away with the signals which we are sending on the market. So with that, we are creating actually a huge confusion on the markets, where you have people lobbying, a lot of bad will, a lot of really conflicting interests. And as long as we have these confusing signals, which are on one hand protecting private interests, and on the other, or driving rather to say private interests, and on the other hand, we all collectively want to protect the public interest because we see the consequences of that way of driving of this quantitative-based economy, then we have a problem. And as long as we will not have that courage to deal with the real drivers and pressures which are causing this confusion on our markets and also driving our economies in this quantitative direction, we will have many problems solving that. And by that young generation, it's a real promise, and I sincerely hope that working with them hand in hand could help us.
So that's probably one thing which all three members of parliament could react shortly. What is our courage at the moment to end the economic system? I start again with Dilara Burkhardt.
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
The question is, Janis said we have to have the courage to change the economic system so that prices tell the the environmental truth. So that's the question. Do we have this courage, yes or no?
need to have it. I think it's very important as we now live in an economic model that gives the destruction of our planet, of our livelihoods, no value, and this is wrong, and we need to change that. And this is why I think there are many tools in the Green Deal we can use for that, by having a sustainable change of the way our economic model works. And I give a lot of hope, especially in the circular economy strategy, but it's not guaranteed, and we need to look at the implementation.
Michael Bloss.
Thank you also for bringing this topic up. I mean, what you are basically aiming at is really to the center of politics. So, whose interests are prioritized, and as you explained, currently we have a little bit of a schizophrenic situation in which we want to prioritize the interest of private wins, and also the interest of this sustainability, the planet, and future generations, and sometimes they are just conflicting. I think when we look into the new European Parliament, we have seen that there is a lot of courage sometimes. For instance, when you look into the debate and the decisions on the European climate law, the European Parliament went really into they were courageous. They are asking for greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030 of 60%, substantially more than what Commission and what member states ask for. They are putting the phase out of fossil fuel subsidies into law, and I think that's encouraging as well, that we see that we can actually create majorities for such ambitious policies, and that majorities we can create because society is responding. And now, of course, that doesn't always work. When we look at the votes on the EU in agricultural policy, we unfortunately saw that that we did not make any progress here, and it was actually the big lobbyists who were in the end successful with sustaining the old system. So yeah, what it means is that we have to, I mean, Tsipras said, okay, we know what has to be done. We know since the 1970s, since the Club of Rome was founded, that there is this systemic, inherent, how do you say, that we have difficulties in prioritizing this interest, and we are unfortunately often prioritize short-term interests. But what is really needed is to mobilize in the society for this more long-term view onto politics, and then make the right decisions. And I think this is what the current young generations really bring into the political debate, because for them it's existential. It's their life. When they are 50, 60 years old, they are suffering from the climate crisis. And now it's just a question, are we able to mobilize them as fast as it is needed in order to really listen to science and then get the political majorities for it? We are certainly at a tipping point here also in politics, and the hope is that the societal and political tipping point is faster than the one in the Earth's atmosphere.
And Sirpa, what is your opinion about that?
Well, I think that it is doable, and I just would like to challenge one point of view, and that point of view is the question whether we are putting the interest of the private businesses in front of others, because I think that we ought to acknowledge the fact that there are interests of private businesses and interest of the private businesses, and I'm trained in economics and business administration, and my claim is that the market economy is beautiful in the way that it is supportive always to someone. It's profitable always to someone. The question is only to whom and by which incentives and which rules of the game. And it is up to politicians to decide that point. So we are not actually working for private businesses when we are working for the walking deads. That means those private businesses who do not want, who do not understand, or who do not will to change. And there are those ones that actually would be able to do it and willing to do it, and we are not serving them momentarily. And second point, how to do it, it's a bit like IFRS, and I'm very excited about what the ECB is doing and what the Financial Stability Board is doing. If we can get that on credit ratings, on financial politics core and monetary policies core interpretations like on ICB, and very, very excited to look what the Lagarde is doing, then it facilitates the change much faster. And if we can enable the private investors to do it, and if we can incentivize and disincentivize the politics there, it'll do the trick. And sorry, I really hate to say this, but I'm losing a bit my belief on politics to make by themselves the decisions, because after 30 years in politics fighting about these issues in growing pressures, and the politics is still there where it is, I think that we would need to have that kind of a outside pressure much faster and much stronger. And if we just rely on political parties to do it, there's too much vested interest and too much negative lobbying and too much of short-sightedness and too much of populism to solve it. And please do convince that I'm wrong.
Okay, thank you. There are some questions from the auditorium, and if I bring it together, shouldn't we use the Green Deal to address all these topics of efficiency, circularity, waste reduction into an action that is to be fulfilled by a network? Standards in order to fulfill many of the policies of the Green Deal. You know that Europe has a huge power of standards. So I again start with Dilara Burkhardt.
As we are the biggest market in the world economy, we can be this global standard setter, and we can start with ourselves. So I think when I read, for example, what Sophie Treu was writing about how we can implement the principle of cradle to cradle in the sectors which are right now not sustainable at all. For example, when it comes to the question of circular design, waste reduction, and plastics, I think this is a very strong fundament we can build on, because we know that the standards we are setting, they are already improved by so many actors on the ground, so many companies that decided to make a difference and to implement in their own work cradle to cradle. And I think that this could be a European standard, and we can elaborate on that. And there are many points in the Green Deal where we can add on. For example, when it comes to the textile strategy, we know that the textile industry is not one of the least sustainable when it comes also in the question of recycling material. And I think there, for example, the principle of cradle to cradle should be in the heart. So I think there are a lot of good points where we can start when we talk about the Green Deal, and we have to mobilize for this, and we have to make the voices loud that are already making a difference, and support them by having a good political framework that supports those who have a sustainable use of resources. So I think there is a room to push for that, and I'm not ready to give that up, even though there's the crisis, because I see there's a lot of hope and chances that develop with this ecological social ecological transition in Europe, and a lot of good jobs and a lot of sustainable growth might come from that. So I'm very optimistic that we can set the standards and make a difference.
Bloss, in your view of that?
We use the power of standardization. Yes, for sure. I think with the eco design directive, we can also really do something here. What was described in the circular economy strategy from the European Commission is exactly this. For instance, the ban of how do you say, the practice that you destroy goods that you have ordered online but send it back. That's for instance something that where we have to use European power when we talk about the product design of electronic devices, that you have a right to repair. That's, I think, really important. I think too, well, it's an interesting debate also globally. We see when you look into the 5-year development plan of China, their aim is to be the one who are setting the global standards in the near future. So that would be like really a shift in global economy. And I think here we have to rethink about what is a European advantage. And I think to develop standards that go into the direction of a full circular economy is really something that Europe is good in, and we should be developing it fast and set it as the global standard. So yeah, and again, but it's a little bit what maybe also Sipra said in the direction of, I mean, we know as also all of the people here on the panel, they are ecological concerned, and we know what has to be done. The question is just, do we actually mobilize the political majorities to get it through? And this will be the hardest fights that we will have and that we will see in the coming years, and where we, I think, not only have to fight in parliament, but also there has to be a big societal debate about it, what is supported, because we see when it's put on the public debate, there is a lot of support for climate and environmental issues and also laws. So we can win this, but we have to win it also in the public debate.
Thank you, Michael Bloss, for that. Sirpa, your view of this?
Well, I think that the Eco Design Directive is definitely the biggest fight and the biggest win what we can get. Because imagine if we could say that all the products and packing that are sold or leased in European markets needs to be upgradable, repairable, modular, reusable, maximum longevity, however you define it. So increase the lifelong of the product with the tenfold of existing today. And they should be recycled in the highest material level of the material use, so that there wouldn't be this downgrade of the material and their value. And then would be up to the product producers and importers to justify that they meet these challenges. There you would then need the standards, and you could create the standards. And there again, you would need to have effective upgraded market surveillance regulation, that all the products and packing that enter EU market actually would comply on those demands. And that actually would have enormous impact, because think if, for example, out of textiles, 2% are produced in Finland out of the textile consumption, and 4% of the Europe's textile consumption is produced in Europe. But if we would have this kind of a eco-design directive and standardization, it would totally challenge the whole textile production and its modalities globally, because we are still 20% of the global market. So this is so big market space that no one would leave that aside, and that's why it would have a kick-off effect on the whole sustainability of global production chain. So this is something that I really think that we would have the big twist in products.
Thank you. We are more or less at the end of our hour. I would like to give Janis 1 minute for his last words, and then I take over my last words. So please, Janis, the floor is yours.
Very much, Harry. I will just on one example explain exactly that what we are talking. I was not before saying that we should put private or public interests ahead of one or another. I was saying that we should align those interests. And that's a totally different story. So you can't set on the market with one hand one signal, and then with regulation and with public funding you send another different signals. Let me give you. I am a true believer of the Eco-Design Directive and also of the standards. Of course, they are important, but ask yourself, and this is exactly the message which is coming from Compass. Ask yourself a simple question: why we need the Eco-Design Directive? Because producers on the market are simply not incentivized to design the products in an environmentally friendly way. So that's why we need the directive. What would be if we would rather connect producers again better with the product, because they have no incentive. The value is not retained, and they have no incentive that they would get anything from the product back. If we would better connect the producer, which is currently responsible for the product until the product is produced and sold, and then it's consumer, and at the end of life or use, it's actually the society. If we would reconnect him better, then believe me, he would be very much interested that this product would be environmentally friendly designed, that the business models would be orientated in that way. And that's exactly the story of the Compass. It's trying to tell us that we have to look at the essential reasons and not just at the end instruments, which we are sometimes using and are very effective, very useful. But of course, it would be even better if we would start to look at the reasons why we need those instruments and connect those, or better to say, align those public with private interests.
Thank you, Janis. Yeah, we are over time, heavily over time. Something after being since the 90s as a scientist in this field of research, of policy advice and all these things, well, it's important for me and for the future is that we stay with a science-based approach. You can only collect majorities if it's science-based, if it's not made by belief or other things. And in this time where more and more people are not using science-based discussion, science-based policy, it is important for us in Europe, as a region where science-based policy advice, science-based societal discussion is happening, and it leads to, at the end of the day, also parliaments that work in a direction that is science-based good. If I only remember that years ago, science proposed that Europe can lower the greenhouse gas emissions by 60% in 2030. Also, we as a federal environmental agency have done that. So now this science-based advice reached the parliament and gives the base for making new goals, for making new laws. And it is important, if we talk about the future of resource efficiency, of lifestyles, of how much is enough, about circularity, that we also do that science-based, and it is even more complicated than with climate. With climate, you have one reason, you have one thing you have to solve. With resource efficiency, it's a multi-systemic, holistic view necessary, what Janis showed, what every one of us being longer in this field of discussion knows. So it is important to stay science-based and to have all these ideas, what we must do now, and knowing that urgent action is needed, because if we don't have urgent actions today, then we will have a problem yesterday, not today. We have the problem already today. So thank you for following, and we will continue with parallel sessions, several parallel sessions. So if you go out of these plenary, you will enter the main room, and then you can choose different places. You can go to the chat place and talk with others. You can download information. You can go into the cinema room and looking on several cinemas. Several people ask, is there a possibility to get the transparencies and everything? We are collecting them. We are having also films. Everything is filmed. So if you want to look tomorrow in another parallel session, then it will be on the website, so you can see other parallel sessions also. So thank you for following us, and thank you for being with us, and we see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the input and the discussion.
Thank you for being with us.
Bye.
Thank you for being with us. Okay.